Mike
That'd be fun.
is the founder of Open Concept Consulting, which he started in 1999. Since then, he's been active in developing and enhancing open source content management systems to facilitate client control over their content. He's passionate about building communities of collaboration, and Mike and his team at Open Concept have worked with several national government and non-government organizations. They have effectively delivered large projects like websites for PWGSC's Buy and Sell, the City of Ottawa's and the Standards Council of Canada, and have consulted for numerous other government departments over the years. And with that, I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you very much. Today I'm going to be talking about what has made accessibility in Drupal a success. And I wanted to highlight a few of the points for Drupal 7 and Drupal 8 in particular. So just a bit about my company. We're a Drupal shop. We work with this content management system, and Drupal is, of course, a popular open source content management system. We focus our accessibility contributions largely to this platform. If it's not related to Drupal, we don't particularly do anything with that. I've been a Drupal developer now for almost 9 years and have spearheaded the accessibility improvements in the Drupal community for the last 6 years, and now a Drupal core accessibility maintainer. That means that my name will be listed in the maintainers.txt file when Drupal is circulated, but mostly it means that I have additional responsibilities to try and keep up and to maintain accessibility issues within the Drupal community, and to try and play a leadership role to bring more people into looking at accessibility in Drupal. So I wanted to first talk about the rapidly accelerating change of this particular problem. We all know that the internet is changing quickly, and that the trends on websites seem to be modifying almost daily, whether it's the one pager or there's all sorts of flat approaches and different design approaches that people are trying to use to either implement carousels or not implement carousels. There's a great number of options that people are trying to go off into to use in terms of making their websites look current and up to date. The sheer number of web pages appear to be following Moore's law and are increasing exponentially. One of the things that's also a challenge is that the World Wide Web Consortium is constantly working on new standards. People listening to this webcast will be familiar with WCAG 2.0 and probably the recently released ATAG 2.0, but may not know about the evolving standards that the WC3 works on with regard to graphics, semantic data, audio or video, privacy, internationalization, security, web and TV, and of course the mobile web. This is just a sampling of some of the issues that this community of people are trying to work on to try and set better standards. But that means that the rest of the web is in terms of trying to implement these suggestions is trying to keep up with these standards. Mobile devices are also becoming much more powerful and transient, with people being encouraged to upgrade their smart devices yearly. With each upgrade, there are slight differences in user experience when browsing the web. And user expectations are also growing. People are expecting something that is a much more full-featured application from whenever and wherever they're accessing the web content. So people are not expecting a simple static web page anymore. People would like to have a much more of an application framework when they're accessing the web, whenever and however they're accessing this information. Accessibility also no longer means just supporting blind users, as organizations struggle to meet the needs of members, citizens, and consumers with a wide range of disabilities. Most organizations are unprepared to evaluate their site for dyslexic users, for the full range of vision or mobility limitations, learning disabilities, or multiple disabilities, just to name a few. The web is supporting everyone these days, um, from toddlers to our oldest senior citizens, and a big push will happen as baby boomers in many countries begin to naturally lose their ability with age. The aging of baby boomers is going to be a huge issue for accessibility, and as mobility and sight in particular are issues which tend to get worse with age. Um, this is a complex issue. Even knowing some of the accessibility enhancements to address other disabilities will degrade the experience of others. For example, the amount of color contrast required for low vision users versus dyslexic users. There's a real effort to try and provide a more personalized user experience for people on the web and being able to give users control of that. The BBC has done a great deal to try and lead the way in that front to give users control over their experience. Um, there's also many legal implications now, as accessibility requirements are becoming law in many jurisdictions, resulting in a wider range of sites seeking to meet these requirements. In Drupal core, or in Drupal rather, core is a very specific set of modules and themes that you get when you first download Drupal. This is the very base of what Drupal is built on, and everything is related to that particular core group of files. You need to then, if you want to produce and customize an effective website, you need to add contributed modules and themes to that in order to be able to build something that's useful. However, more generally, core is a set of common application programming interfaces, conventions, libraries that a content management system will use that can be extended by various plugins, extensions, or modules. This way, you can start with a very generic piece of software with a lot of generic functionality and extend that beyond that to try and meet your needs. In Drupal, there has been a history of developing to standards, which is well established in the community. The core developers see the importance of identifying and codifying best practices as we're going to be working with or against the system for another 3 to 4 years. Taking accessibility practices and incorporating it into core just makes sense. It is it's a great way to taking accessibility best practices and implements good semantic websites moving forward, which is something that is beneficial for everyone. In Drupal 7, we were able to decide to make WCAG AA our goal, and we didn't quite achieve this, but several accessibility issues were made release blockers, and the community got behind fixing these. There's also been a real move to build an inclusive culture in the developer community, one that is where the developers are actually on board and understand some of the challenges that with accessibility. In any actively developed project, there are going to be new ideas that will arise that may break some of the old functionality. Now, Drupal has quite a lot of unit tests that are built into that, but there still are changes when there are big user interface updates that are being done, or when the code is being substantially rewritten, as it has with the move from Drupal 7 to Drupal 8. And as such, it's important that that all developers in the core team have some base understanding of accessibility and the impacts, what are likely to be accessibility challenges. So, although there's better standards, regulations, training, and automated tools are all great. These are all really important things that we need to have to make websites more accessible. They aren't ever going to be sufficient unless people start looking at accessibility issue problems at the source. Um, and in many cases, there are source libraries that websites are drawing on to to build most of the World Wide Web. Um, by removing barriers in the core of Drupal 7, over 800,000 websites are more accessible by default. Now, not all of these accessibility improvements in core will be expressed by these websites, but the range of developer errors will be more limited, and in general, it will take more work to implement a less accessible solution. We built defaults into Drupal so that if a developer is just following the examples provided in core or provided in the documentation, that they're going to produce something that is generally quite accessible. With Drupal 8, we've pushed many of the challenges up to the libraries we use. jQuery UI and CKEditor both had to make accessibility improvements to get into Drupal core. That benefits everyone who uses those libraries, not just Drupal. Sometimes the problems aren't with the site, the CMS, or the upstream libraries. Sometimes the problems are with the browsers we all depend on. We've been able to link bugs between different open issue queues, allowing the source of the problem to be clearly highlighted. This can only help better prioritize the accessibility issues in the browsers. Finally, changes in assistive technology can easily break your accessible website. We ran into this years ago when upgrading to Apple Snow Leopard, when the upgrade to Apple Snow Leopard changed how VoiceOver responded to our CSS DisplayMan solution. We had created a special CSS class, Element Invisible, which we could simply re-engineer before the release of Drupal 7. Issues like this can happen all the time, and so having a greater correspondence or communication between the assistive technology vendor and large open source content management frameworks can be really quite useful to see that best practices are supported and that there is a standard platform to work toward that assistive technology will support moving forward. With Drupal, we've centralized solutions to common accessibility problems and provided a simple model for people to use. As I mentioned in the last slide, we use our Element Invisible class is used by core, but it is also leveraged by many other modules and themes that we want to hide a heading for sighted users, but expose it to screen readers. Drupal developers are already used to using the central form API for building sites. So by building accessibility solutions there, they're just becoming part of any web forms that are being generated by the site. In Drupal 8, we extended the form API to better manage compound form elements such as radios, checkboxes, and field sets. Drupal 8 comes with two exciting JavaScript additions. WAI Area Live Announcements API, which will allow a consistent interface to convey to a screen reader user when there are dynamic changes to a page. We've also added the Controlled Tab Manager, which gives developers the ability to see the screen readers and to see that screen readers and keyboard-only users have a logical flow when tabbing through a page. This will be increasingly important in more interactive sites. The most popular and powerful Drupal 7 contrib module is Views. Views is now in core. This is great news for both the admin side because Views UI had a great number of accessibility improvements that needed to be made to it. Plus, its output now provides modern HTML5 table caption support. There's also the heading and IDs listed within the tables that are generated by Views by default, such that it's easier to go off for users to be able to track their location within a table grid. There's a lot of tables within Drupal's user interface, and increasingly Views is being used to go off and to present tables inside of Drupal's administration interface as well as to public pages when there when there's tabular data that needs to be expressed to the public. Semantics matter. Drupal has always been pretty good at creating semantic web, but with Drupal 7 we were able to make them better. Some of the things we did in Drupal 7 was add headings to a number of places, including lists and blocks. This gave screen reader users more points to help them navigate through a page's content. We consistently used our CSS class elements invisible to hide headings, which were obvious to sighted users. One of the other things we did was to add labels in Drupal 7 so that by default, any input form, if it has a title, it has a label output. It is output with a label element that is tied to the associated input form. Both Drupal 8 core themes now include area landmarks. We've included area roles and properties where we can have more meaningful interfaces with screen readers. Part of modernizing Drupal 8, we tried to remove instances where labels weren't tied up with input forms. Furthermore, prior to Drupal 8, field sets were used to group items visually, but had no semantic representation. We're now using them properly to group compound form elements. And we've also added in Drupal 8 a number of new HTML5 elements to be able to provide semantic information in the web page and provide an example for how to go off and implement HTML5 best practices in two very useful themes. One of the goals of Drupal 8 has been to be responsive out of the box, not only to the public web pages, but also on the admin side. Many of the accessibility changes we've addressed in Drupal 8 were built for the desktop, but they also apply to smartphones because of the responsive theming we use. Most people don't realize that many smartphones and tablets also include built-in screen readers. VoiceOver is a powerful screen reader that is built into all Apple devices. TalkBack is built into Android and similarly allows users to browse and interact with websites. There's also a growing number of apps that are geared to people with disabilities, allowing them to have greater leverage with their cell phones. It is going to be hard to predict how these apps will be used with the web, but it's something that we're very much going to have to address when it comes out. Mobile devices also support a great number of browsers. So from your iPhone, you can be navigating not only through Safari but also through Chrome and Firefox, and likewise with the Android devices and Firefox devices. There's a great range of ways that you can navigate through this, and you're not simply tied to the operating system that comes with the cell phone that you purchase. Drupal has tried to make the whole user interface more accessible. It's not simply about the end users, but particularly in modern interactive websites, there's little difference between the needs of an anonymous user filling in a complex web form and that of an administrator configuring a site. So anonymous users, authenticated users, content editors, site administrators, developers, all needed to be able to have access to WCAG 2.0. And so we've struggled to go off and make the whole interface as accessible as possible. We've also wanted to encourage people of all abilities to get more involved in the community. Thus, we've worked to make the developer tools we use and the Drupal community sites we use AA compliant. We aren't simply restricting our goals to those which are commonly used by anonymous users. So multilingual websites are difficult. Making them accessible is even more of a challenge. Drupal 6 was the first major release to address internationalization. Since then, with every major release, we've seen this improve. internationalization is a challenge for screen readers as as the software needs to know um, to switch languages to pronounce words with the proper pronunciation rules. Most modules and themes contributed in core um, use Drupal's internationalization structure. There was a big effort to go off and to bring the Drupal community on board to using a common string translation process, and it certainly has helped to see that it's much easier to go off and to implement not just a website in one language, but in two, three, or four different websites, the four different languages, all at the same time. Um, it has become a standard part of what to expect in a well-maintained module, and the proper management of strings so that they can be translated into a range of languages is taken seriously by the community. Um, Drupal is a global CMS that is able to handle complex multilingual websites. Accessibility is likewise a global problem. We've taken some steps to address WCAG's language of parts, but it is likely that we will not fully implement this in Drupal 8. There's a lot of ways that we want to be able to deal with strings that have not yet been translated to automatically tag those as being in a different language. So if you're viewing the website in French and not all the content has not all the strings from the user from Drupal have been translated, that a screen reader is notified when an English string pops up that is part of the default non-translated strings. But hopefully that will happen, or that will be available through a contributed module. Drupal 8 is now beginning to push the proudly invented elsewhere theme. So many people are now beginning to see that all custom code is a form of technical debt. There will be it needs to be maintained regularly, may have security problems, will need to be upgraded in the future. Therefore, it can make sense to try to leverage the work of other communities doing similar projects rather than maintaining something you wrote. This concept is being adopted in many places in Drupal 8, but certainly has implications with jQuery UI and CKEditor. We have dropped native support for autocomplete and are using jQuery UI's interface instead. We were actually able um, be we were actually able to in Drupal 7 build an autocomplete feature that was more accessible than that was available by jQuery UI, and from that we were able to the jQuery UI community went off and leveraged what we did to incorporate it into the latest version of their code. Drupal has never come with a WYSIWYG editor, but we are now able to contribute to the CKEditor community rather than develop something that's unique to the to Drupal. Another thing that we brought from jQuery UI was the modal dialogues, which have been a real challenge, and being able to leverage the jQuery UI modal dialogues has been a real advantage in building something that is a modern, responsive environment. And it's been really quite useful to try and to be able to push CKEditor to be more accessible, and having the Drupal community push with and work with the CKEditor community and test with the CKEditor community has been a real advantage. We've also gone off and made it so that the configuration of CKEditor is something that can be managed through the user interface, but with a screen reader, so that it isn't something that is limited simply to people who are sighted and are able to use mice. In Drupal 8, we also adopted HTML5's boilerplate for some of the language. We wanted to try and make things as simple as possible, and use consistent formats and standards where we could. So we switched from using elements invisible to visually hidden in order to go off and to adopt to a broader community standard. So another way that the Drupal helps uh, websites adopt accessibility is by providing good examples. Um, we provide examples that developers can use to build the software that they want. Um, Solid modules and themes in core provide working examples which developers can follow. These follow best practices so that they are more likely to work their way into contributed modules and in production websites. The And that's the same with the Bartik and Seven themes, which and many of the other common themes which are adopted as part. A lot of websites are being implemented with either the Zen theme or the Adaptive theme, both of which have spent quite a lot of time working to improve their accessibility. Adaptive theme made a commitment to be WCAG 2.0 compliant, and it's been in many ways ahead of what we were able to accomplish in core for the theming elements, at least for Drupal 7. It's not sure. I haven't seen what adaptive theme or Zen are going to come out with for Drupal 8, but certainly they're starting with a solid background with Bartik and 7. The accessibility documentation is online in a central API as well as in the handbook. Furthermore, Drupal 8 has adopted change notices with significant commits so that it is easier for developers to follow the changes. Online documentation is really quite useful because as people are looking through the code, they find out references to accessibility and why some of the changes have been added to improve accessibility. That's available in document on Drupal.org, but also in the code where developers may be looking for it. It's also useful to review the accessibility issue queue. There are often examples of code, different arguments as to why a given pattern was adopted, and even more useful, external links with references to the problem in the broader community. It's quite interesting looking at even simple things like CSS display none, because that it's really quite a simple set of CSS that has been applied, but there have been hundreds of discussions back and forth about what is the best way to address that over the years. And even with the differences between Drupal 7 and Drupal 8, we've needed to make many modifications to see that is that's able to keep up with the browsers and devices that are out there. External links to references pointing to why something would be a good implementation is really quite important for a project like Drupal, because you need to be able to reference sources and blog posts from experts to be able to verify why why something is an accessibility best practice. So culture change is important for any community that wants to be more inclusive. One of the biggest elements of culture change in Drupal was involving people with disabilities. Um, it was it is one thing to talk about accessibility when referring to stale WC3 guidelines. It is a completely different issue to when you're talking about a blind developer in your issue queue who is blocked from using some element of core. In Drupal 7, Concept was lucky to hire blind developer Everett Zufeld, who worked on core full-time for a number of months. Drupal 8, blind high school students started volunteering in the issue queue and became quite involved in several core issues. We were quite involved in organizing a crowdfunding approach to bring Vincenzo Rubano to DrupalCon Portland. It was a really exciting experience. Being able to meet with core developers, but it was that face-to-face interaction. And right now there's a picture of Vincenzo meeting with Dries, who's the founder of Drupal, and I know that was definitely an important moment for Vincenzo and hopefully for Dries as well. Now there's recently a lot of discussion about automated testing, and automated testing I think is a great way to find improper semantics. I don't know if there's a better way to determine if a skip link is actually pointing to the anchor they're targeting, or if a label tag is missing its corresponding input label. Um, the Wave toolbar is still my favorite. There are, of course, others, including some great ones that are being discussed in other talks. There's also a number of Chrome extensions that can go off and work to evaluate color contrast. The one in the WCAG CSS, there's a Chrome extension that actually converts the entire page to an image and then looks at evaluating the color contrast within that. So that's also quite useful. The Chrome one just takes a lot more time and is a little bit harder to go off and to track down where the problems actually are, but probably is more versatile. There's also been a lot of talk about doing automated testing in Drupal 8 with the Quail.js library. At this point, it isn't being used as part of the Drupal build process. Ideally, however, every patch that is being considered for core will be tested to see if there are any accessibility problems introduced with it. Hopefully, we will see this formally incorporated before Drupal 9. Quail also offers the opportunity to be able to give content editors the immediate feedback about accessibility issues with their website, and I think that that's also a real advantage, being able to provide an immediate, not only a site scan that will allow you to go off into a link in with either automated tests as part of your build process, or as part of a site review, but finally also with content editors and being able to provide that instantaneous effort to give feedback to users. This is being developed right now and actively developed, and hopefully we'll see some results from this fairly shortly that will be able to be easy to implement within Drupal 8. No amount of user testing or experts can give you a complete picture about a CMS's accessibility. That is why it's important to encourage people to download early versions of the software and to try it out themselves. Drupal can be pulled down either as the release candidates that are available, but also through Git. People are technical enough to use Git. That's quite useful. There's also simple means to test both Drupal now and any version of Drupal and any modules of Drupal, but also to test patches through an application called simplytest.me, which allows you to actually for half an hour to have full access to a Drupal implementation that is set up for you and hosted on the cloud. And it's a really useful way for people to look at and quickly evaluate Drupal 8 in the direction that we're going, and that's really quite useful. There's also obviously the issue queues that for accessibility and in terms of looking at whatever issues are of a concern to you, looking at what progress has been done for them. That is quite simple to go off into to find accessibility issues in Drupal.org, and they're all organized by taxonomy, so it's quite easy to find that. There's also an IRC channel for discussion. So there's opportunities to discuss things through IRC with other people who are interested in accessibility and Drupal. And so there's certainly a number of ways to get people involved, but it's important to try and to seek feedback and to try and get people engaged as early as possible in the process, so that you can get feedback from them and incorporate it into the CMS before any future release. So please take an opportunity to check out Drupal 8. It certainly is something that we're quite proud of, and would love to see what we may have missed and what we can hopefully incorporate before it starts being used in production websites. So Drupal drives about 3% of the internet. Its large, dynamic community of users, developers, and themes is quite useful. Drupal is certainly one of the biggest. WordPress is bigger. Other popular open source content management systems like WordPress, Joomla, and Moodle are also making considerable efforts to improve their accessibility. By working together on common projects, we can both identify common solutions, influence other open source projects, but also help to direct those proprietary tools that are still being used by the majority of users. So still Microsoft Windows, despite all of the warnings from the Homeland Security Office, is still being used in government offices and agencies around the world, and in many cases works better for some users who with some assistive technology. Apple is also although they've done a lot of work with the accessibility and through VoiceOver and their iOS implementations. But still, it's a closed box. There's not a lot of opportunity to go off and to directly influence Apple. Google's Chrome is released under an open source license, but they do generally it's again difficult to go off and to influence them. It's quite useful to see what they've done with Chromebox, and there's certainly an issue queue you can participate in, but they're very much driven by Google, and it's something that is trying to influence that is definitely a bit of a challenge. And also Freedom Scientific, and for that matter, Dragon Naturally Speaking, both really useful tools for people with disabilities, but there isn't necessarily an easy way to go up and to interact with them and sort of agree on best practices for their implementation. But if you have a sizable chunk of or critical mass of the internet that you're able to work with, it gives you more potential voice to be able to discuss things with them. So, in conclusion, start by addressing accessibility problems at the source. It's very important to go up and to begin at the source of the problems as opposed to at the final destination on a production website. Where possible, centralize solutions. It's very important to try to have a single point where problems can be resolved and where everyone is using and leveraging the same libraries, if possible. It's always useful to find ways to add more semantics, which will be available to a number of machines, not simply to screen readers, but the more semantics you add, the more Google will be happy with it, and the more other smart devices will be able to take advantage of that. Don't forget about accessibility. Accessibility is also mobile and applies very much in that framework. Be inclusive. Not just this is not simply an issue for a small group of people with disabilities. In Ontario, it's up to I think 15% of the population has disabilities, and I'm not sure that even addresses all of the range of people who find barriers on the internet. Collaborate with other software communities. This is also an important point. These are big, challenging issues, and I think it's in many ways too big for any one user to go off and to take on their own. Engage with people with disabilities and also with robots. Absolutely having firsthand experience with people with disabilities using the software and trying to go off and to incorporate it is incredibly important. But automated testing is also a really useful way to go off and make sure that your software is consistently applied and that any new changes can be applied moving forward. We also definitely encourage people to seek feedback from their users, but also to make sure that they give feedback and be able to participate in issue queues that are up above whichever software you're using, whether it's a chosen library that's hosted on GitHub or whether it's the issue queue for the Bugzilla tracker on Mozilla. There's a lot of opportunity to get engaged and to provide feedback about why a solution, once you identify where the problem is, you can go off and contribute to seeing that solution gets fixed more quickly. This is definitely a huge issue, but by working together, we can definitely make a difference, and we can do a lot to make the experience of people with disabilities much more equitable on the web. So thank you very much, and I'll just now go to see if there's any questions from people, and go to there we go. Are there any questions?
Any questions?
Presentation.
It was fine on my end, at least, once you got started.
Good. A lot of general solutions that I think can be applied to many other content management systems. So hopefully some of the ideas here will be ones that can be brought forward to both to other communities working to go off and build tools to build for websites.
I don't think there's any burning questions waiting for you. I'll just have a quick look in the chat again. No, I think we're all good. Yeah.
Excellent.
There might be one coming now. Maybe not. No, just compliments on your talk.
Certainly, this is.
Make
sure
there's no questions in the queue. I would like to say, well, thank you very much, Michael, for the great presentation.